Hey everyone, before we get into the body of this episode, I just wanted to give it a quick bit of context. This interview was done in early spring 2022 while the world was just exiting the Omicron wave of COVID. So dealing with COVID protocols was very much at the top of the minds of my guests at this point. So with that said, let's get to it.
You're listening to Tonebenders, the Sound Designers Podcast. Let's do this.
Hello and welcome to Tonebenders. My name is Tim Muirhead and I will be your host for today. Loop Group is an important part of bringing a film, game, or series to life. Loop Group can take a scene that feels flat and lifeless and elevate it so it feels like it's bursting with energy. If done right, Loop Group can sell emotions, focus attention, and add tension. But it's the doing it right part that can be tricky. That is why we've assembled a dream team of folks that can talk us through the best practices, do's and don'ts, and pass on their hard-fought lessons that they've learned from their countless Loop Group sessions. Joining us today from London, we have Nina Hartstone. Nina won an Oscar for her sound work on Bohemian Rhapsody. She was last on Tonebenders in our episode 94 talking about her work on that film. She told us a story about how she organized a special outdoor Loop Group session so that the crowds would sound more realistic. And it really showed her passion for Loop Group, so we had to get her back on for this talk. Welcome back, Nina. It's great to have you on again.
Thanks very much for having me on again.
We also have Brian Bowles with us. Brian is a busy Dialog Supervisor based in New York City. His past projects include Uncut Gems and The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, as well as many, many more. Welcome, Brian. It's great to talk to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
To give us a different perspective, we have a goddamn legend joining us today. When you ask around the East Coast about who is the best to record ADR and Loop Group with, the response will almost always be Bobby Johanson. If you have a favorite film since the mid-90s, chances are good Bobby recorded some of the voices for it. Based out of Harbor Post in New York, welcome to Tonebenders, Bobby.
Thank you for having me and for that great, no, I find not true, but introduction. But thank you.
Finally, to give us a game audio perspective, we have Tim Atkins. Tim has worked as a voice designer on the Far Cry series, The Division, and lots more. I saw Tim do a talk in Montreal a few years ago and was blown away, so I'm glad to have him with us today so we can pick his brain. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Okay, the idea for this talk is to dig deep on the ins and outs of having a successful Loop Group session. Although all my guests have extensive experience with Loop Group, let's imagine someone that is jumping up a level and working on their first feature. What advice are you going to give them to start to prepare for their first Loop Group session? So let's start with the prep work. Nina, how do you go about breaking down exactly what the script needs and then turn that information into planning a Loop Group session?
I mean, Loop Group is one of such a fun aspect, actually, of our job. We look at the pictures and we start thinking about how we're going to record the crowd. I mean, in an ideal world, we're thinking about this even earlier, to be honest. If we are engaged in pre-production and we read the script, we'll start looking and go, okay, hang on a minute, you're going to get a load of extras on set here. They're all going to need voices in post-production. So we will look through and we'll start trying to think about the best, most authentic way we can go about giving voices to all those extras who appeared during the shoot. And we'll go through and we'll start breaking it down into how many voices do we need to get in, what kind of split do we have, what gender split, what nationality split, are there any foreign languages that we need to be thinking about? And that's that's populating the extras who you see on the screen. There's other areas where the Loop Group might come in useful as well. There might be a scene that's maybe got a TV show running in the background or a radio. We'll also be using our Loop Group to create the content for that more often than not. They might be pretending to be a sports presenter, so you've got a sports show playing off of the TV or doing a radio show for us. So voice actors do provide quite an important role in our soundtrack, particularly in a film that's got an awful lot of extras in it.
Tim, is it similar for game audio?
Actually, it kind of is similar, yeah. So-called AAA gaming production cycles tend to be pretty long, but it's something we need to think about early in pre-production as well. Same sort of considerations that Nina mentioned in terms of gender and that kind of thing. And also, how big a role do crowds play in this particular game? Is it a pillar of game design to have large crowds? Because it's quite a tricky thing to actually pull off in games, to have a large amount of NPCs or non-playable characters on the screen at one time. It's very memory and processor intensive. So in order for that to happen, it's a very deliberate decision made early on. From there, we need to decide when in the production cycle we're going to actually tackle the Waller recording or the loop group recordings. And it tends to be towards the end because games are constantly in flux and changing all the time. So the later we can push it, I guess it's exactly the same in post. Less likely you're going to have to get that loop group back in and do more recordings for something that's completely changed. From there, it's kind of looking through, talking with the narrative team and the AI teams, of course, and collaborating with those departments pretty closely. And also looking at the scripts as they start to form. Traditionally, I'll start looking at the cinematic linear cutscene scripts. That's usually where a lot of the loop group action is happening, traditionally in a lot of the games I've worked on. And also from there, I get notes from sound designers who think their missions that they're designing sounds for will need some crowd. I'll look through all the mission scripts as well and take notes. But then I'll just keep asking the narrative team, do you need crowd for this? Do you need crowd for this? Because it's not something they're necessarily thinking about at the forefront of their mind, whether they need those kind of sounds. But obviously we in the voice team are, so got to keep at them, really.
So, Brian, you have gone through the script. You figured out kind of where you need the loop group.
Yeah.
What's your next step on preparing for the actual session?
Well, preparing for the actual session is, I go through and I cue based on what I'm seeing and what I'm thinking about from the scene and what may have come from the spotting sessions with the director. But I'm thinking about how I want voices to fill up a given space. Are we in a busy cafe or are we in a small, quiet, candlelit, restaurant? Are we in the subway? Are we in a protest? Are we just on the streets of New York? What neighborhood? So I'm thinking about how I want voices to interact as we're moving through with our characters. And so I'm cueing based not only on where I think I could get a voice to, attach, if you will, to a person on screen, but also what's the effects team going to need out of actual crafted pseudo-sync dialogue for the scenes, because sound effects libraries, as vast as they are, don't give you the real tactile sound of what Loop Group can do. And then I'm thinking about, is the scene a happy scene? Should we be hearing happier voices? Should we be juxtaposing a happy loop group to a sad scene? Should we be, how can we be coloring the frame as I'm thinking about cueing this stuff so that ultimately when we get on stage, I've got some directing thoughts on what to get the actors to work on. The other thing I'm thinking about is how many people I want to bring into the studio and how many days I want to record versus how many the production wants to pay for. Creatively and comfortably get into that conversation from a creative, beneficial perspective and not necessarily from just a brass tacks, budgetarily, budget perspective. If possible, I like to bring in a loop group early in the movie so that we can get some sounds in and attached and working. So that the rest of the show can start to see, oh no, we can do more of this, we can get more in, and it gives us a chance to craft it and fine tune it as we get through to the end. Doesn't always work that way, but that's always a goal of mine, to get in as many possible days as Loop Group on a job.
So are you actually writing script for the actors?
What I do is I jot down sort of, I think about it, it is improv for the most part. And so I'm sort of jotting down just bullet points, think about this, so that I can plant those ideas in the actors' heads so that they can then do what they do, which is act and, and perform. They can take that and come up with something that then hopefully feels organic and natural. But, some jobs need a very specific script. I may write it, but it may also get punched up by the director. They may put it in the hands of the actual writer who's getting the credit. It comes and goes. Sometimes we're just coming up with things live on the day in the room. If you have to do an EMT worker or an ambulance driver or something like that, the Loop Group actors have books of cheat sheet stuff that is some nomenclature, codes, language that's used. But you prep your Loop Group as you're coordinating and dealing with your casting agents, you're coordinating with them and saying, hey, we have a scene that's here, we have a scene that's like this, we have a scene that's like that, so that they can be interfacing with their actors and getting that stuff put together so that everybody is showing up as best prepared as possible. Lots of people wear the writing hat.
So, Bobby, when you have a session booked with you, what do you demand? Not maybe demand's not the right word. What are you expecting to get ahead of time?
Demand is the right word.
Demand is the right word. What do you need to get ahead of time, and how much ahead of time, I guess?
Well, this is, are we talking COVID or are we talking pre and post COVID? That's a whole different story. So are you talking about in the studio if everybody was on the stage here or?
Sure, let's start with that.
Okay, let's start with that. You know, the studios were a lot bigger back in the day, and we used to have bigger rooms here in New York. I still have a very big size room, one of the biggest, if not the biggest in New York, but it's definitely scaled down space-wise. So when you're fitting 15 people, 15 group actors in this room, it does get tight. So I usually need to take the podium out and get everything set up. The majority of loop groups are recorded mono because you don't want to really think it. There's no reason to record in stereo unless it's for something, sound design that you need it for. So what I'll do is I'll hang a mic and I'll put lines on the floor, and then I'll hang a far mic, one in the ceiling, and then I have my mics all kind of around the room. I'll put a mark, and then I'll put a smaller mark when I need something that's going to be a lot more on mic, which is never really more than 4 feet away. All this stuff is recorded with a lot of space. The key to a group in the studio, I actually enjoy doing it very much because you get to fuck around with different mic techniques. You can't really ruin. It's not like you have an actor who's in here and you want to try something different, and if it goes wrong, they have to do it again. It's okay as long as it's not time consuming. If something doesn't sound right, say, all right, hold on for a second, and let's start it again. With group, it's mixed usually down at an effects level, so if you try something out and you know it's going to be okay in the long run. But what I like to do is try out different things. I love movement. I insist on it. So if there's a walk by, I get the walk by. And if it's an interior scene and you're in a big room, I'll have the actors walk by, keep the distance from the microphone, and they'll start in the corner and they'll walk to the other side of the corner, still talking. So you kind of feel the Doppler of them. Even though it's a mono signal, you're still hearing the off, on, off, off, off of their voices, which I think mixes great. If it's an exterior, they're out on the city, they're in the street, and they're doing a walk and talk, I want to have them on mic the whole time. I don't want to hear the room. So what I'll have them do is walk by the mic and pivot at some point, and then just kind of walk backwards, aiming their, so they stay on mic, but the distance, you feel the distance, but you still get the movement. You get that same effect. So I set the room up so there can be a lot of movement going on. Again, there's no science, there's no rules to doing it. People do it differently, but generally it's what's going to sound the best that's not necessarily going to be mixed up high, depending on the scene. If you wanted, like what Brian was saying, like some radio stuff, we're going to get that tight in so you can futz it. And when I'm in the studio, I record, like if we're doing a walkie-talkie type of a thing, police, I'll record with the actual walkie-talkie. I'll record them on one track so it's unfutzed, so it's clean, so they can futz it. I'll also give you a futzed recording, and I come right out of my mic pre into the recorder with the other walkie-talkie back there, so it's naturally futzed. I think it's a cool thing for the actor to have the actual prop in their hand as they're doing it, and also I love the way it sounds in the back, and it's quick for playbacks, and it's the real thing. So again, it's a fun day.
What Bobby's talking about, like his movement in his room and experimenting in his room is really a lot of fun. He's happy to reposition the mic 800 times a day, put it off and on and rearrange it. There's a couple of different phone types that you can pick up and hold in your hand when you're making phone calls for actors. We did a session where we had, a dozen people doing waltzing around your room so that we got movement with conversation and so that people were feeling like they were in the action while they were doing it. All of these things of trying to put back the reality of what was happening on set into the recording makes a huge difference, and Bobby's always happy to experiment with that stuff.
So Nina, when you show up for the loop group session, what have you sent ahead of time? What are you arriving with?
No, I'll always send cues ahead of time, but I have an awful lot of notes for myself. I think I always, as as we've talked about here, we never seem to have quite enough money in the budget for the amount of crowd we want to shoot. I'm hoping to try and get many more voices than I can. I always have way more pages than I can possibly get through on the day. So I have my own kind of priority list always of how to cover things and where to maybe go and grab some wild tracks going through, if I know that I can use that maybe to cover multiple scenes so that we're not spotting to every single point. So we do send things over in advance, and I always talk with the ADR mixer as well about what kind of mic setup we're going to want, because we quite often use a boom mic as well to try and get the movement. So we'll get them doing all those things and have distant mics and close mics and get them doing sort of round robins around the mic to get all that movement going up and past and the Doppler effects. And then for some of them we'll maybe have a boom swinger in there, so you get couples walking past and being tracked by the boom, and then the boom comes back again and they carry on and track them through. And as these guys have said, like, movement is so key to everything that we record in an ADR theatre. Movement and just allowing the actor to feel more natural about what they're doing. And there's just nothing particularly natural about sort of standing in front of a lectern and performing their lines. So all of that I do find is really, really helpful. So as much preparation as possible, I think, generally, in sending the lines, and also thinking about like period pieces and stuff. If you've got something that's set in Victorian times, I'll sit there and I'll start making little cheat sheets for the actors that they receive in advance of like how much was a pint of beer back in those days, so that for the pub scene they know what they're ordering, what kind of foods did they like, what were common names that they might want to call each other. But you do have to be careful, because as soon as you tell them something, they tend to all use it. So you just have to, if I give them one name or they hear a name from the show, that name's going to pop up. So we always, by every single actor, so we always get to the point where it's like, right, you're banned from using the name Stephen, no more.
That's really true.
Nina touched a little bit on something I missed out on when I was talking about the planning, actually, which is kind of building up a palette of sounds that aren't necessarily part of the cue list initially, but judging from the game's themes and the region, like the setting, and things like that. I always try and get together a list of nice to haves that I'll try and get, that I just kind of have a feeling that will come in handy down the line for one of the sound designers or one of the voice designers implementing that stuff. So I'll look at the map world, and maybe there's different districts. They might be talking about different things in different districts, for instance, different regions of the world. And the other thing that you kind of have to think about in games is the interactivity, of course, but also the kind of dynamic changing world. You go to a place in the daytime, it's a busy market town, you want to hear that kind of market wallet that you're used to, but then at night, you come to the same place, you don't want to hear that same bed of ambience playing. So you have to kind of figure, well, is it going to be fine to have nothing, or is there going to just be a few kind of sparser crowds around at that time? So all these kind of extra dynamic considerations in games that I try not to forget. I have, but I try not to.
It sounds pretty fun, actually, like having to go to the same location at multiple times of the day and like paint that picture with voices. Sounds like a pretty fun experience.
It is, yeah. And then you also have to, of course, think about, well, what if the player disrupts that crowd? Like, what if someone stabs someone, and how the crowd going to react? What's going to happen to that audio? Is it just going to fade out, or can we record a nice tale leading into a panic? Cue, those kinds of things are often, you've got to think about that as well in the prep time.
Absolutely.
So something that has happened in the last couple of years, as we're all very, very familiar with, COVID has happened. And the idea of having a bunch of people in a small room yelling has become something that isn't as acceptable anymore. Hopefully that will change. But I've had lots of guests on the show recently talk about how this change has been revelatory for them, because instead of getting one recording of the entire group, they're getting a bunch of individual recordings. Bobby, how much of a pain in the butt has that been for you? I'm sure that like quadruples the amount of work you're doing, but it also quadruples the amount of work on the back end for the dialogue editors. I guess for the group, maybe Bobby can start. Is this something that's going to stay, or?
No, I don't think so. And the reason why, I think the groupers might like it to stay because they can stay in their pajamas at home, but it comes down to acting, and it's hard to act or be somewhere, city or whatever the shot is or whatever the movie is, when you're in your closet. It's difficult to be, even though you're in the studio in these cases, you're with the other actors, so you feed off the other actors. And it's very difficult to do it remotely as you're isolated, and then usually we'll bring them together with a Zoom as a visual, and I take their audio tracks in, we bring them in. There's the one positive thing, and I think everybody will agree, and any ADR sound supervisor will agree with this, is the fact that you can isolate the tracks. Because there's always one voice in a perfect take
Always.
that you want to get rid of, always. And it's always been a thing. This has been since they've been doing group. You know, you're able to go into your ISOs and lose that one voice if it's not working, and then you're good. That's the positive. The negative is no movement. You know, I was saying before about how important, Nina mentioned the same thing. It's so important to have the movement, and yet you're sitting, again, in a situation, and you're either walk-in closet, if you even have one, or in your room. And it's just, you can't really stray off mic situations because not only the mic's really not that great, but it's also their environments aren't studios. This is a dead environment studio with a floated floor on springs. So you can control the liveliness. We can't do it from somebody's house. They don't have a studio. So it's been an issue, but we've gotten really good at it. We weren't the first to start doing it by all means. We kind of came a little late into the world because we were using cutting rooms down the hallway as studios.
So you had like each actor
doing that and bringing an actor, so they had their own private room, and we're very COVID safe here. So we went through all the protocols, and they would come in and they would get their own private rooms, and I ran mics down the hall. And we could cover a 10-person group, especially if they're coupled, if they're a married couple or they live together. It was okay with SAG to be in the same room. We started that way, and we were early doing that. So as home recording became, people got more, we kind of figured it out more. It's got its pluses, but really, as far as I'm concerned, once we're back because there's nothing like being able to act with somebody, doing the walk and talk, and being able to physically act with them. It's, again, these actors, they feed off each other, and it's really important part of group.
Brian, how have you found the tracks in COVID times?
Everything that Bobby is saying is correct. I'm very happy with some of the group sessions I've had for the series and the films that I've done during COVID. But that being said, there's a lot of like emotional space that is lost in the track. I am very active on the ADR stage when I'm directing. I'm usually standing up with the actors, walking them through body language and giving them things to react against and, giving them little pushes or things like this or, some physicality things to give them a surprise or directing them up or down or whatever it is. And none of that stuff translates at all in the Zoom medium. No one is paying attention to my little window in a wall of windows. It's very hard to get something that feels as authentic as everybody performing together, playing together in the studio. I'm with Bobby. I'm really hoping that it changes. Like, I can see principal ADR going this way for a long time, but I would really love to see Loop Group go back to everybody in the same studio, same theater, all at the same time, working together. I think that organic nature just produces much better track.
Besides that, the audio that you're getting at the end of the session is very static still, and it's on mic. You don't have the ability to record something wide or off mic with these home setups, so everything is on mic, and it's really not the way to do group. Again, like I was saying in the studio, I'll have these guys, we have room mics 16 feet away. That's what you kind of want, that we want to deliver these tracks to the mix. Again, treat them like effects tracks, so they're going to subtly sit in. And, with these home records, you can do it. You can take something and you can throw it behind the door. You can pan it as a walk. But it's on mic. It has to be on mic, and that's what you're getting, and that's what we're delivering to the mixes. And the mixers know, they understand what we're up against, and some are good with it, and some just like us. We'll just use production or whatever or effects, but our hands are tied basically with how we can record this stuff. And a lot of the microphones that they're using, again, aren't really up to pro what they would use on a set. So it is what it is. And, I'm looking at it now as we're actually finishing movies and we're creating scenes. And I just worked on a big HBO job that takes place at a period piece. And we got really decent stuff from home stuff. But as happy as I was with the quality of it, it's still nothing like getting everybody into the room for performances.
Tim, I saw you post a video on social media. I think you know which one I'm talking about, where you figured out a way to do a large loop group session with a bunch of people. Do you want to explain how you went about that?
Yeah, I mean, I got pretty lucky, really. The last big project I was working on, the video you're talking about, it was a Ubisoft project, and they have a very large motion capture stage that we could make use of. So I am all too aware of how lucky I am to have that resource at the time. And also, COVID protocol, when we came to record, was such that a certain amount of people could be in that kind of space at one time, as long as socially distanced. One of the engineers at UB, Jacob Thiessen, he came up with what he dubbed the octagon of safety, which was essentially a lot of large baffles in the round, and actors would face in towards each other, but they'd be socially distanced with baffles between them. And yeah, it worked out pretty well because we kind of had the best of both worlds in many ways. I was a lot like Brian, where I like to kind of get in amongst the crowd and use my body language and conduct them in a sense. So I could do that in the center of the circle, which also made me feel like a badass. And a lot of the actors could see each other and still play off each other. The downside as well, of course, is still there's that lack of movement still. We could get around that with some of the smaller group cues where they could walk around the mic in small groups whilst remaining socially distanced. I went a bit crazy, like Bobby was talking about. It is a fun time to play around with mic positioning. So we had, 20, 25 different mics just set up, including all the actors with their individual ISO mics. We had an MS pair distanced and a small portable recorder really distant, and then an ambisonics mic in the middle as well. So there was a lot going on. Yeah, it worked out pretty well. And we still had the benefit of being able to duck down those voices that just poke out a little bit too much with the ISO tracks.
Yeah, we should just mention really quick that the example you just heard of that recording is the camera mic. It's not all the actual mics in the room. And if you want to see how that was all set up by Tim and his crew, you can go to tonebenderspodcast.com and navigate to the page for this episode, and the video will be posted there. So a couple of you have brought up the idea of directing the loop group. Let's talk about kind of the, I don't know if politics is the right word, but the stage politics of who gets to talk to the actors. Are you in the room with the actors? How do you go about directing the loop group? Nina, do you want to take that first?
Sure. It really resonates, you guys talking about that. I often feel like an air traffic controller when I'm with the loop group. It's all like, and those signals just don't work over Zoom, of course, so you are getting very physical with directing them through. I mean, I work very closely with the casting agent who usually attends the sessions as well, who's very familiar with all the group that have come in and each individual, their specialty and what they're best at and who might be good for this role or that role of individuals that you're spotting on screen that you want to give voice to. So we work together really closely, kind of just trying to get the best out of them and keep the energy up and keep everybody very excited about what they're doing, which, as you say, is getting everyone together is absolutely key for that. Through COVID times, we've started trying to figure out different ways. I mean, as you know, we've recorded a fair bit of loop group outside anyway, so it just seemed natural to carry on doing that kind of stuff. It's obviously completely tricky for anything that's very sync. So, we always have to do sessions in the studio to capture the sync stuff where we really need to kind of actually crowbar some voices into mouths. But a lot of the crowd we can use as sort of, it's setting the scene, or it's creating a scale or a depth of crowd in a street or in a concert or wherever. So in that sense, it doesn't need to really be synced to picture. And so we've just carried on doing the same kind of thing. So we've shot crowd in a couple of schools. I've just kind of borrowed style and go, can I go in there? Can I bring some recorders? Can I bring some microphones? Go into your playground and record in there. We've also started using my local football stadium. Which is only a small football stadium, but it's great because they've got all the facilities for sort of green room area, which is really quite large. So people we can open all the doors, make sure it's ventilated, and they can pop in there for their breaks, but they've got plenty of space outside. And again, that gives us the capacity to put mics everywhere. As you were saying, Tim, we've got mics at many different distances and capture that real reverb. It is so key to just get the reality of what you're recording. And as you say, in that whole, it's great having the single mics, but them all being on mic is problematic when you get to the mix, because everything that we're doing is fakery. So as soon as you add fakery on top of fakery, which is like adding plugins to try and create some sense of space in your recording, of course it all just pushes you a little bit away from believing it. So being able to record it authentically on distance mics, you just can't beat that. Having this sort of distance between the microphones has been, so actually quite a good thing. I mean, normally we'd do outside stuff, but we'd have a boom and they might all come together, or they might go in groups and do small pairs or fours or all those kind of things, and they'd all be gathering. But as soon as COVID kicked in, the first session we did, which was quite early on in the pandemic, where we were being very, very strict, we did it entirely outside, and we had a strict 2 meters between every microphone, and each individual artist had their own microphone. And we didn't swap. We cut out the boom and we just made sure that they had their own mic for safety. Again, we've been able to record like 20 people at once, but actually have quite good separation on their individual mics outside. So it's almost like you've got the best of all worlds in that way. So looking on the bright side, that is one of the positives that has come out of it.
Sounds pretty amazing.
It's fun. It's loads of fun.
Yeah.
Brian, how do you go about directing your sessions?
I'm pretty hands-on. The jobs tend to trust me. The director tends to trust me. And so they know that I'm in there to get stuff to support the movie. The supervising sound editor trusts me. And so I'm in there, and I'm getting what I think is the right thing to get all the way through. Working closely casting with our casting directors and our coordinators, and they know what I'm looking for. We've worked together for years. And so I can give them I need this kind of person, or that kind of person, a dozen of these kind of people, and so on. And then some of the stuff I'm doing is not really what we're seeing on the screen. Like if we're in a restaurant, I'm not going to shoot 8 people having little peas and carrots conversations. I'm going to put them at a table, with some cutlery and with some, glasses, and let them have a casual conversation. And I'm going to shoot that 4 or 5 times with 4 or 5 different pairings, so that I can, when I'm editing it, start to paint a better picture with their conversations, and let it have, a little bit more of an ebb and a flow, and, and prepare it in a way that is much more prepped like an effects pass, so that when it gets mixed, there's a lot more control over how things are put together. I try and let the actors do what they get to do. Like giving them a short 2-second cue, give me the perfect thing for this moment, never works. They never nail it the first time through. So I tend to record 40, 50 seconds too long on any given take. Let them get their sort of improv brain turned off, run out the 1 or 2 ideas they've already put into their head, and then they actually have to think, and then they become more of a real person, and the content becomes much more usable. So I'm using often the end of a take that is, 30 seconds, a minute past the moment that we beeped in for. By doing that, it speaks to something Nina was talking about, like how can I reuse these materials all throughout the movie? 4, 5 different tabletop conversations, I can use that in every restaurant scene in the entire movie. So I may have taken longer to do 1 cue, but it addressed 4 scenes. And so that's a time management thing that you start to figure out, through all of these sessions of how can you be really efficient? You don't actually have to touch every moment in the movie. You have to touch the important ones and gather material that recycle, repurpose. Oh, there's this little 4 syllables of something that don't make any sense, but it's the right frequency to drop into this other scene, so that, it just fills the little hole in the dialogue. You felt like there was somebody in the room, and then you move on, and you don't really think about it. I'm thinking about those kinds of things a lot, like how to be efficient with time, but also get the most natural sounding performance as possible, because everybody says Loop Group is horrible. It's very rare that a director is excited about Loop Group. Everybody has their opinions on how horrible Loop Group is, how horrible Loop Group actors are, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm very happy to let all of these incredibly talented actors actually get a chance to perform and show what you can really do with Loop Group. because this stuff doesn't exist in effects libraries, and rarely does it exist in production. And so it really is, we are painting the middle ground between what is our lead actor's world and what becomes the effects world. So we're painting that 4 to 10 to 15 feet zone between what's in the foreground and what's really in the background. And so that's where the whole second layer of life really starts to play out in the movie. So without quality stuff, it just gets turned down real low, slapped a lot of reverb on it, and it just sort of goes away. Spending the right time to record quality material, I'm always happy when I get a lot of loop group into a movie, because it means I did my job well and allowed, actors to do their job well. And that's always a good feeling.
Very well said.
Yeah, that was very eloquent.
So, Bobby, what is someone who's coming in to do their first loop group session with you? What are the common mistakes that you can tell someone's hasn't been around the block before? What can someone do that kind of pisses you off or tips you off to their lack of experience with this?
It would definitely be fake voice, like not a cartoon voice, but something that they're trying to be unique about. The idea, and I always tell this to the group, and I reiterate it all the time, we want everything to blend in. So unless we're looking for poke outs, we want you guys as a group to all kind of work together. You don't want to have a stick out. And the thing of it is with group, it's difficult too, because, they're getting paid to be here and they're doing a job in their mind. They want to do a great job. So they want to have their voice, and ideally what we want is everybody, depending, if we're doing a walla pass or just a group pass, everybody to kind of stay in that same realm so it'll work as like a bed and nothing will be poke out. And if you have that voice, that's usually the case. But I find out that a lot of actors that will come in and this will be their first time doing it, are really good at it because they're not overthinking it as much. Or it just seems like, we get good performances once they warm up to something. But it's a difficult thing. It's like, especially if you're tracking sync, this one over in the corner up there, you got to watch the sync and get it to the point where it's believable. Again, it's going to be mixed way low. The audience is never going to hear it. It's a subliminal, what you see in the theater that you're not going to think about it. And that's what we want to do. We don't want it to all of a sudden go, look at that weird voice coming from that lady in the corner of the screen and take you away from, Tom Cruise. So it's the idea is the blending, unless we look for call-outs. And we do that as a part of our day, too, to get peaks so we can have these voices come out. We can mix them real low. And it's not a peeve because it happens all the time. It happens even with the pros that are here all the time. You just got to say, just can you bring up your pitch? Can you lower your pitch? Just to kind of let everybody kind of meld together as a group.
So, Bobby, when Nina shows up and tells you what mic she wants you to use because she's got that Oscar in her back pocket, you're going to listen to her.
Absolutely. What are you kidding?
I like the collaborative approach. Let me just say that now.
If Nina's coming in, we're all ready. We're ready for anything.
But when someone that you're not as familiar with or haven't worked with before, if they show up to the session and start asking you to use certain mics, is that something that you like or don't like? Or
no, it happens. We're here to make everybody happy. We're not redefining. I say it's not rocket science. There's a science to this, but it's not. You can overthink this very easily. And you can over-cue it very easily, and you can I want to do this. I've had people come in, they want to use a DPA microphone. Fine, we use it. In theory, a DPA microphone in a space like this isn't really going to give you what you want because you don't have the space to really let it work, which is basically a stereo. It's a 3 mic, it'll give you left, right, and center. It'll give you that Doppler effect. Again, if that makes you happy that you have that, absolutely we'll give it to you. And I've got big sound supervisors that swear by it, and so I do it for them. And I'm happy to. It's a little bit of a pain in the neck because it takes me off my game of what I listen to normally. So, but we adapt. If it's some new sound supervisor that comes up with great ideas, again, group is time to fuck around with recording. So I'm okay with it. Again, I'm also used to hearing what I hear, so it does hamper then the way I'm going to monitor things. So I always back it up with what I know familiar, and I let them use their wacky mic setup, and they probably use my mic in the end.
So what is your mic? What is your mic setup?
I mean, I use a Sheps up front because it has a wide diaphragm where it'll capture. If you have 9 people standing in front of it, it's usually everybody's kind of caught up. Everybody will be on mic-ish enough. I use what I use in here. They're all production mics. They're all booms. 81s, Sheps, whatever works. It's really the space and the performance. Like you could probably use a handheld 87 and record group and it'll work. It's getting the performances and the right sound, and really the microphones are a plus, but it's not necessarily gonna make or break your group.
And Brian, how do you go about interacting with the recording engineer versus also interacting with the actors? Do you just leave the recording engineer and trust them, or are you talking?
I think it's a back and forth. I mean, I know what I can hear live in the room because I like working without headphones on. I'm interacting with them, and so I'm hearing what they're doing live. But I am regularly checking in with Bobby or whoever studio I'm in. What did that sound like to you? Can I hear that as a playback? Sometimes you're hearing things not as dynamically as you want to in the room, but you hear the playback and it's actually better than you expected. And sometimes you have the opposite. And so I'm constantly checking in and leaning on them. They are ears that do this on a regular basis. And so, trust what they do. I'm in their space. If they tell me it's not working, let's figure it out and make it work right. I may not have thought that we got a great performance, but I'll look back and Bobby will be like, wow, that one was really great. It's like we're doing a production team at that moment. We are collectively working together to get the best possible thing. So I think interacting with your engineers and your recordists and your mixers is all important stuff. Everybody's in this together. No one should feel relegated, oh, well, you're just the person that's putting this down for us. We're all in this together, and the day is a collaborative day, and the more that we can be a team, the better results we're going to get all the way through.
Very important too is when we play this stuff back. If Brian wants to hear something, we're not playing just the Walla or the group that we just shot by itself. We're mixing it down. So we're ADR mixers is our title, and basically we're just live mixing this stuff. So it'll show you it'll give you a feel of how they're going to mix it. It's important for us to kind of play this stuff back as they're going to use it. So if we're recording, I don't know, a park and they're having a football catch, they're going to be right on mic or mic-ish, and they're going to, be giving us these loud voices. I'm going to take this stuff to play it back. I'm going to put it so far back in the distance with volume, maybe a little bit of reverb or whatever to just kind of sell it as how it's going to be mixed. And then that'll give Brian and Nina or everybody an idea of how it's going to work in the film. And then but meanwhile, you're getting your tracks and it's 2 loud voices, naked by themselves without any effects on them. It's our job to kind of show how it's going to work.
No, it's true. Bobby's playbacks are always really smooth. There's always some fill to it. There's always some space. There's some thought. There's it's it's being ridden through. It's being crafted and presented. Plenty of times where it's hey, I can play that back for you better. Let me do it one more time. And again, that's part of the team aspect. We're all working together. And it's fantastic. I feel lucky to have worked with Bobby for years, and we have a good understanding. There's now a shorthand in place. That's not always the case, but if you give everybody in the room respect, they're going to give it back to you, and you're going to get good work. Trust your engineer. And if they are saying that, hey, this doesn't seem like it's working, take them at their word. You're in their space. Figure it out together.
We'll send this to Tim first, and if anybody else wants to jump in on this. You're directing people, you're using your arms up and down, you're gesticulating wildly. How do you also take notes on which are the good takes, or how are you relying on keeping the information so when you go back to your edit system, you aren't just staring at 1,000,000 hours of material and nowhere to start?
Oh, that's a great question. Yes, I do like to gesticulate wildly, it's true. But in between takes, I'll be taking notes. I have a laptop in front of me. I'll just make a few notes, whether a take was good or not, or whether there's something within that stood out as something that would be really useful for a particular scene. But more often than not with games, everything we get could be useful. So I might make a note that something is completely unusable for whatever reason. Maybe someone said a word that cannot be uttered for legal purposes or something. But generally speaking, there could be gold in a lot of that stuff that I may not necessarily pick up on the set. And I will also trust the engineer and ask for their opinion. I will take it all back and I'll go through it and I'll edit it after the fact, because I have a bit more of the luxury of time. I'm also not always the one to implement this stuff in the game. Like a lot of the time it's going to a sound designer, or it's going to someone who's in charge of the cinematics to put into our cinema tool, or even it's going across the world for a different team to use in whatever mission they're working on. So my job really is to package up a delivery that is useful for all those people and easy to get their head around. So it's not a perfect system by any means, but I would go through, like I said, after the fact and I actually utilize the UCS file naming system.
Okay.
To make it abundantly clear, just from looking at the file name, what was contained in that file. I also attached a lot of metadata in SoundMiner, and embedded that to the files so that people could get as much information just by looking at stuff. And whether there was anything I thought useful in the take, I might put in the metadata as well. And additionally to that, I'm going a bit off piece from your question, but I would have a folder structure just in Windows or whatever, and you could see if it was Waller for a particular scene. It was organized by the cinematic names, and then the palette stuff, the wild stuff, was in its own folder, which was also subdivided into like what kind of crowd it was. So the challenge is really to make it as accessible to as many people without them having to think too hard. And even with those additional mics, it's great to have them, but with games, you don't quite have the luxury of knowing exactly where it's going to be played back in, what environment that's going to be in. So I've done outside Waller before, and I love doing that stuff because it just sits perfectly. But in games, unless your whole game is taking place outside, then there's a good chance that it could be played in an interior space. So you have to kind of think about making the end result as malleable as possible for the people who are going to be implementing it into the game. For ease of use, I mix down the ISO mics into a stereo track, and then also the ambisonic mic, because that was a bit more of a useful perspective as well. And so those were the two stereo things you could get if you just wanted to not dig in too much to the different mic that we recorded. But I also made the Reaper sessions available to anyone that would like to sort of dig in deeper, maybe do their own mix of the ISOs if they wanted different voices to stand out. I mean, they could even pretty much remove all the female voices or the male voices if they needed to as well. So, yeah, don't think I answered your question particularly well there, but I meandered around. But hopefully there's some useful info in there.
Nina, how do you take notes and manage the session?
Well, it is tricky. I always come in thinking I'm going to take lots of notes, but I've come to the realisation now that I am just like waving my arms like a mad thing through the duration of the session and absolutely shattered by the end of it usually. So obviously if I'm in a studio, my ADR mixer, if we play stuff back, if we're trying stuff out, as Bobby was talking about, we'll have a select track because we know that, something is popped in, we've got some good bits in there and that will work. But I tend to now, if we've got a big session, I'll bring along an assistant or an additional editor to sort of take the notes while I'm kind of speaking the whole day and waving my arms around. It is very handy to have someone who's kind of got an eye on that. But again, much like Tim, we listen through everything, and what we'll generally do is we'll have our cue names for things, but we'll then go through and all the material that comes back, we will go through and catalogue it and rename it and create a kind of a library for whoever's going to come to it and edit it, so that you can pluck things. And it is that whole, we've touched on this scene, but we can use these people having dinner for another scene. So we know it's, a couple talking about whatever, and we'll type those kind of things into the names. We sort of do a combination of trying to capture as much information on the day, because there will be things that pop into our head or things that you don't want to forget. But usually you take that material away, and that's when you start living with it and you're listening to it in a detailed way and you start actually editing it. Yeah, at that point, kind of the names are meaningless, really. You're listening through and you're cutting all the best bits together.
It's interesting that you mentioned how tiring it is, because it is absolutely exhausting.
It's isn't it?
Yeah.
And so, and taking notes is maybe the last thing on your mind a lot of the time.
No, exactly.
If you're not tired at the end of a day of group, you've done something wrong.
Yeah. And if your group have got no voices left, or they can still speak, you've done something wrong.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Big part of the directing, I think, is to keep the energy up when it needs to be up.
Yeah.
And that is a tiring thing to be doing.
It is. Yeah. Especially when they're doing repetitive stuff. They're quite often having to do the same sorts of things over and over and over again. So to make them do it again with energy.
Yeah.
One more time.
So, Bobby, what does someone leave with when the session is over? What are you delivering?
With COVID, we actually have a cool method where we break it up. So not only do they get the ISO tracks, which is everybody's microphone from their feed separately, I also do a mix down. So I'll break, if I have a 10-person group going, I'll take 5 of them and put them on one side, 5 of them on the other side. So ultimately, the editor then can actually, if they don't even want to go into the ISO, if they think all 10 people is too much, so they could just drop one side and go, or listen to either side. Again, another advantage to this, but they'll just, in a Pro Tools session, we'll clean it out. Everything will be labeled. Nina mentioned a select track. If we're redoing an individual or something, we'll build a select track, but ultimately, they're just going to get, the files down as we laid them down in the time sync. And that's pretty much it. I mean, we record everything. Generally, it's simple. It's not a crazy session that you're going to be looking for things. Everything's time-stamped. And
just one final question for you. How often does like a above-the-line person show up? Do the directors ever show up for Loop Group? Like, that's pretty rare, right?
Certain times when the film director will want to be part of the Loop Group. And if they understand what group is, it's great. It's great to have their input. It's great to see, it's important to them. They'll understand it. We do get the occasional director that doesn't understand Loop Group or will come in and listen, cold on something that we're doing. And they're like, what the hell are you doing to my movie? And they really forget that this stuff is going to be mixed down. It's going to be cut. It's going to be edited. You're not going to really hear it. You're just going to feel the voices. I had a director years ago. We were doing a movie. It takes place in a disco. And he sat there and he was like pacing back and forth in a room. And he's like, those 2 people in the back booth over there, it was like Studio 54 type. I got to have them be saying something that's, pertains to the time. And he's walking back and we spent 10 minutes of him trying to come up with something when there's no way you're ever going to hear that mixed in with disco music. It's going to be played so low. So it's an understanding and it will slow us down. It slows down the motion of the session. And again, it's a good thing if they understand group and how it's going to be used because they'll be able to look by some of these performances and know that we're not going to use that or I love that. And it's a whole different world when a director is involved in the group session. But I prefer it when the editor is just here because they know what they're doing. Like Brian was saying, the film trusts him and he knows what he's doing. And then it's more of a collaboration with someone like myself or any mixer to be involved in the session. And it's like too many chefs in the kitchen. So we kind of have to bow out when the director's here. But again, we give everybody what they want. And that's the idea.
I totally agree, though. It can be tricky. And I think, we're all, because we do it so often, when we hear group performing, I'm sure you guys are the same, I'm editing it in my head as I'm listening to it going through.
Yes.
So I already know as it's going through which bits I'm going to use. But obviously that's something that we've learned over many years of doing this, whereas I think, to come into it as a director and you're used to directing principal actors, of course, you're sort of presuming you're going to hear every piece of it. I think, Loop Group actors, and it's no reflection on them, they do need to be kind of wallpaper. And as you was quite rightly saying, Brian, they kind of, they settle down into something a bit more normal a little while into the take. And it's a hard thing to do. It's actually quite hard to sort of make up a fake conversation and sound real and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's quite right. I think you need to know what you're dealing with when you're working with Loop Group, so that you can actually sort of appreciate the session and appreciate the bits that have gone well and understand that you have to record way more material than you're ever going to use to get the bits of gold out of there and the bits that are going to work.
Thank you very much for joining us today, everybody. I think this was a really great talk. Not only did I learn a lot, I was entertained. So what more can I ask?
Oh, thanks, Tim.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for joining us, and hopefully we can all have you back on soon in part 2 of the Loop Group conversation in a little while or something like that.
Absolutely.
That'd be great.
That'd be fantastic.
I'd love it.
Look forward to it.
Really would.
This is fun.
Awesome.
Tonebenders is produced by Timothy Muirhead, Renee Coronado, and Teresa Morrow. Theme music is by Mark Strait. Send your emails to info@tonebenderspodcast.com. Follow us on Twitter via @thetonebenders and join Tonebenders Podcast on Facebook. Support this podcast. You can use our links when you shop with Amazon or B&H, or leave us a tip. Just go to tonebenderspodcast.com and click the support button. Thanks for listening.
Are you looking for more audio-related podcasts to listen to? Tonebenders is part of the Audio Podcast Alliance, featuring a hand-picked selection of the very best podcasts about sound. Be sure to hear the latest episodes from our friends in the community at audiopodcast.org.